Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Sunday, April the 9th. And today we're going to be chatting with our good friend Barry Casselman, the Prairie Editor. We're going to be talking about three major topics in the news: the attack on Syria, or at the air base in Syria, the Supreme Court. We now have a Supreme Court Justice. And the real question is, did the Democrats have to do this to themselves? Did they have to go to war as they did over a nomination that was going to happen anyway? Would they have been better off saving their ammunition for a future battle? We'll talk about that. And we're also going to talk about Obamacare, the other leading issue of the day. There's obviously it didn't make it a couple of weeks ago when it went up. It never got to a vote. They didn't put it to a vote, but they didn't have obviously the numbers to pass it. And there seems to be a debate within the Republican Party. Do we do it now? Do we try again and try to get something done again and try to pass it to keep the campaign promise that we made? Or do we wait until September when the new premiums come out and there's even the talk of implosion in September? It's an interesting choice. And at this point, because of all of the schedules and, the members of Congress being back home and with summer coming up, we'll see. We'll see what they decide. They may not have a choice but to wait until the summer or early fall. Let me say hello to our good friend Barry Casselman. How are you, Barry?
I'm fine. Greetings to you and to your radio audience.
Thank you so much. It's a lovely day here in North Texas. Very windy, but a very beautiful spring day. You were telling me that it's very nice up there too.
We're in the 60s. It's virtually no wind. It's sunny. It's almost summery. And yesterday it was 75 degrees. So we have no complaints up here in the Northland.
No, it's actually been, these last few days have been absolutely lovely. Well, just a quick note from on this day in history, 1865, April 9th, 1865, 152 years ago today, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant, thus officially bringing the Civil War to a conclusion. As I look back, there's a great book, Barry, about April 1865, and I just want to briefly mention it because I need to read it. That's why I want to mention it. I don't know if you've read it, but talks about what an important month this was for the United States, that this was the month that the United States was basically sort of put back together after a difficult 4-year Civil War. And any thoughts on Lee surrendering in 1865, Barry?
Well, no. I of course, we remember that a week later, a little less than a week later, Abraham Lincoln was murdered, and that affected the post-war period profoundly. April is a very President Roosevelt passed away around this week in April. 1945. There's an American poet who once said that April is the cruelest month, and for some, it is a cruel month because of the passing of important figures and the action of important events. But as I wrote in my latest post on the 6th and 7th of April this year, we had a very significant 24-hour period in which both landmark events took place, both in domestic policy and in foreign policy, from the new administration in Washington.
And we're going to get into those important events right now. The first one we'll touch on. They both, incredibly, they were both on the news on the same day, Friday the 7th. It was really a busy news day. The attack on Syria, which I personally thought it was a good move by President Trump. The attack, of course, was very targeted. It was not there's no escalation, it would appear, of the United States there, but I thought it was necessary given the fact that we had drawn this red line years ago, and unfortunately the red line that President Obama drew was never enforced, and I think the wrong signal was sent to Assad. And I'm happy that President Trump said, it's not going to happen on my watch. If you use chemical weapons against innocent people, you're going to pay a price. I thought that was brilliant on the part of President Trump, Barry.
Well, I think it's one of those events where the success of it, of course, the aftermath of it is unclear. But in its own time, it was a brilliantly successful event because it was a surgical strike. It was neither too much nor too little. It sent all the right signals, but there were no American troops involved other than the pilots of the planes. We had no losses. The loss of life to civilians was minimal. It was in many ways a expensive symbolic event for the Syrian government because they are now on notice that it will not be tolerated, and I think we've seen the end for the short term anyway, an intermediate term of any even people thinking about using chemical weapons. It's simply not unacceptable. And as you point out, it was a fulfillment of a expectation that President Obama created and never fulfilled. President Trump behaved quite well, quite quickly. Days before, he left the impression that there was nothing to be done about Assad, and by the time the attack had taken place and we had the facts through photographs and videos facts on the ground, he had changed his mind because of the horrific nature of chemical warfare. And I think that it's a very interesting thing. A lot of people who you would describe as isolationists, most of them on the right, but some of them on the left, were of course taken aback and were negative about it. But the vast majority of people, including most liberals, most Democrats, applauded the effort. The usual propaganda comes up on both sides. On the one hand, the isolationists say we're getting into war and all that sort of thing. Mr. Senator Paul did his usual number about declarations of war. It was no declaration of war. It was no act of war. It was a surgical strike. It was an aggressive act and a much needed one. On the other hand, so the people who are usually called neocons were a little more happier, and a lot of the liberals were happier because of their for a variety of reasons, some of which are strategic, some of which were humanitarian. But what it showed was one of the less observed, less commented parts of it was that, and in everything he did, President Trump deferred to the people who were experts around him to expedite and create the process of his acts, so that both in the case of the strike, he used the generals, including McMaster's and the Secretary of Defense and the other very experienced figures around him who know. He basically said, this is what I want done, but I'm not going to tell you. You know how to do it, so you do it the best possible way, and they did. The same was actually true in the case of although we're not talking about it right now, we will get to it, the confirmation of Justice Gorsuch. He basically said, I want this done, but he turned it over to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who did a brilliant job and has become surprisingly, the senior partner in the leadership of the Congress. I mean, up until this moment, everybody thought Paul Ryan was the heavyweight, and McConnell was not up to his standard. That's really now the obverse or the reverse,
right,
because Paul Ryan failed in his effort to get Obamacare repealed and replaced, whereas McConnell succeeded brilliantly in getting Gorsuch passed. And but I stress that what a lot of people think that believed in their minds, and some still do, that Donald Trump is sort of this wild card who acts rashly. Well, he's shown that he's very thoughtful. He turns to people who know what they're doing, and he lets them do his bidding. And I think that's very impressive. It doesn't guarantee anything in the future. I remain cautious and remain skeptical for the long-term progress of the administration, but I'm increasingly hopeful now that we've seen some successes, and the president and his team really needed a couple of good successes, and they got them.
That's right. And I thought it was interesting, just to follow up on what you were saying about the reaction. You had Senator McCain, who obviously, the relationship between Senator McCain and President Trump, is probably not the best, going back to what then candidate Trump said about John McCain when he was a prisoner of war. But I thought John McCain, or Senator McCain, made some really interesting remarks. He said that this is the best national security team that he's seen in some time, which I thought was, coming from a fellow like McCain, something that I respect a great deal. And then on the other hand, like you said, you had Senator Paul, who immediately went to the constitutional argument, and I found that unnecessary, because there's no evidence here that this is anything more than a quick action specifically designed to follow up on the red line that was drawn before. But even within, you could argue that this was even within the terrorism resolution that was passed years ago. So I was disappointed with Senator Paul. I'm not quite sure what he's trying to do. I was very happy with Senator McCain, and I was very happy with some Democrats, including Democrats from the previous administration, who came out and said, no, we're happy that he did it. I think, to me, Barry, before we take a break and then we'll talk about Gorsuch, I just wanted to say one quick thing about this military action. I think anybody who saw the images of those kids being treated after the chemical attack, and then, of course, there was images like that also happened a year and a half ago, whatever. I think anybody who sees those images, at least I can only speak for myself, but I felt like, good, let's go out and do something here. We're the ones who have the ability to do something like this. Let's do it, and let's tell Assad that he cannot get away with these things, period. He cannot get away with these things. We're not going to get involved in his civil war. That's always dangerous, and I'm not even sure what side we would fight with, frankly, Barry. That's another concern that I have. I'm not sure what side we would get involved with or what side we would take, especially as messy as it is right now. But at least from a moral standpoint, saying the United States is not going to allow a country to use chemical weapons against its own people. I just think on that, Barry, that it was a huge success for President Trump, Barry.
Well, I agree. I think that I think that the important thing here was the nature of the response and the measure of the response. You can get very emotional about these things, but sometimes those are those are traps. We needed to make a statement that was effective and clear. And he got a bonus from it, because in addition to giving a signal to Assad, he gave a signal to Russia, a signal to North Korea, a signal to China, and then he gave a signal to the whole world that we're back. We are back as the leader of the free world. It doesn't mean we're going to get involved militarily in every little skirmish, but it does mean that on the larger questions and in the most troublesome spots, we're not going to be passive and ignore the problem as we did under President Obama. And now we turn our attention to North Korea, which is a serious problem, mainly because the leadership in North Korea is completely out of control, and eventually left to their left alone, they'll cause some damage. I haven't done it yet. It's only been verbal, but eventually as we learn from history, if you keep ignoring, then you pay a price. And
that's exactly right.
And President Trump and his Secretary of State have said, no, we're not going any further, and that's that.
No, and of course, we're going to take a little break and come back and talk about Gorsuch and Obamacare, but just one last thing before we go on break. I think North Korea is obviously a heck of a lot more complicated. The military part of it is a lot more complicated than just bombing an air base, but I agree with you. I think the message was sent. We'll be right back. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas. We're talking today with our friend Barry Casselman, the Prairie Editor. We have a link to Barry's excellent blog on the show information, and we certainly hope that you look at it and click on it. And, I often link to many of Barry's articles, when I do my posts over at American Thinker, and I'm working on one for this week where I put together some of these ideas that we've been discussing with Barry today. Let's get back to the conversation, Barry. The other big news of Friday was something we knew was going to happen. I mean, it was kind of anticlimactic. We kind of knew that it was going to happen, as they say, but nevertheless, it was still fun to see. And I think I'm talking, of course, about the confirmation of Justice of Supreme Court Justice Gorscuh. I think there's going to be a ceremony on Monday morning with the Chief Justice, where he will be formally put on the court. But of course, he's been confirmed; he's almost there. And I think the big question, Barry, that many people have, and I know you've raised this issue many times in your different writings, is what were the Democrats thinking? I mean, here they went to war over something that was going to happen anyway. And they used up all their ammunition, and they've now put themselves in a situation where they don't have this 60-vote rule anymore, so they cannot use it with the next nominee, whether it's a liberal or a conservative. Well, I mean, whether one of the liberals or one of the conservatives leaves the court, he or she is going to be replaced by 51 votes. And if you just look at it from a strategic standpoint, just from a political standpoint, this was a really dumb move by the Democrats, Barry. I couldn't believe that they fell in this trap. I know their base was demanding it, but you would think somebody in the party would say to the base, guys, this is not the one we want to go to war over. Let's wait for the next one, Barry.
Well, I think, first of all, I think they understood they had nothing to lose in terms of getting rid of... I mean, they were going to lose the filibuster anyway, whether they did it this time or the next time. I mean, the fact of the matter is they created their own problem when Harry Reid eliminated the filibuster for all but Supreme Court, but showed the way, using an arcane rule in the Senate, showed a way to eliminate the filibuster by a majority vote. So I think their attitude was, well, we have nothing to lose here. Because we're going to lose it anyway. But that shows the continuation of their derangement following the election. I think the thing that caused them to do this was Donald Trump, the election of Donald Trump. I think they still haven't accepted the fact that it's a reality. There's even some very silly, almost insane talk about impeachment and all that sort of thing. It's just not going to happen. These are ridiculous. These are delusions, and they're actually, that's what really hurts them. What hurt them most was their standing with the public. What they could have done effectively was say, we don't agree with the philosophy of Justice Gorsuch, but we didn't win the election, and the President of the United States and his party gets to name it, just as we got to name 2 justices under President Obama and going all the way back. So we don't agree, and we're not even going to vote for them. All of our members, all 48 Democrats and 2 independents who are liberals, we're going to vote against Judge Gorsuch to make it clear that we don't approve. But we don't have the votes. And if we try, what's going to automatically happen if we try and do a filibuster is they're going to eliminate the filibuster. And then we'll never, and now wasn't a temporary elimination, it's gone. Now, it can be brought back years from now by another Senate which has a different ideological component, but the fact of the matter is that it's gone. And now any future nomination of President Trump in the next 3 years, possibly the next 7 years, if he runs re-election, will require is a majority vote, and he will name conservatives, and there are his first choice was by virtually all commentary, even by on the left, was a first-rate choice. You may not agree with his ideology, his judicial philosophy, but the quality of the man, the character of the man, the intelligence and the level of judicial judgment is unquestioned. And you had most of the liberal newspapers in the country, including our own Star Tribune, which is very, very left-wing, urging the senators to confirm Justice Gorsuch. So, as you point out, there was a price. Now, the price was not the filibuster. That was going to go, because if they didn't do it this time, it would go the next time, whenever they would try and use it as a device. So their calculation was, we have nothing to lose here, and they didn't even think about how the country. They were thinking about their base, the ultra left, which pushed and pushed and pushed for them to make as much noise as possible against Justice Gorsuch, and they did. And some senators, including our own Amy Klobuchar, who has really had a much more moderate image, has shattered that image up here in Minnesota with the kind of propaganda that she spouted out from her office about Justice Gorsuch. It was way out of character. We had no surprise about Al Franken. We knew that he would say the kind of things he said. But we thought there would be a much more measured and thoughtful response from Amy Klobuchar. Apparently she has ambitions for higher office because her judgment is usually, I know her and I've always respected her, and I was really very disappointed and surprised. And several other Democratic senators who know better.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. They
indulged themselves.
Yeah.
And what they did is they lied. Claire McCaskill and John Tester now are and Mr. Nelson in Florida are very serious targets in the 2018 election, and they deserve to be targets.
Right.
For the way that not only for their vote. I didn't mind their vote.
Right.
I understood the vote, but was the kind of things they said. And you don't have to be a conservative or even a Republican to know that Judge Gorsuch was a first-rate choice.
Right.
And now the next choice may be much more controversial. I don't know. We've got some very conservative judges who are, by the way, now being vetted by the FBI and the other investigative governmental sources. There are a number, maybe quite a number, of conservative judges being vetted for either appeals court level judges or being the next Supreme Court nominees. So that when that resignation or departure comes of a sitting member of the court, the administration will be ready with an already vetted choice for Supreme Court, and it will have vetted choices for appeals courts and federal court choices that are coming up. And remember, all those are now decided simply on a majority vote and with no filibuster. There's a few delaying procedures that will always exist, and that's understandable. But the courts will now be filled with conservative judges, as was the reflection. And remember, this was no accident. It is most clear to me that part of Donald Trump's upset victory was because, even though a lot of people didn't like him personally, they knew what he would represent. He would bring conservative judges to the federal bench, not just the Supreme Court. And he has, so far. And that was why they did
exactly
it.
Right.
So that was the will of the people. It was
right.
not an accident.
That's right. Well, and I think you're right, because I know many of the so-called Christian right, or many groups that you wouldn't think would be supporting a man like Donald Trump. They did because of the courts. But I would just say one quick thing, and then we'll talk about Obamacare. That when many of these senators look at what they call the base, I would go further. I don't think it's so much the base. I think it's a very small portion of the base that happens to contribute money. I'm sure that's the important part of the base. But these are a small percentage, I think, of the overall Democrat base. I don't think that the 46, 47% of the country that voted for Hillary Clinton would join these attacks on Neil Gorsuch. These are very radical elements within the Democrat Party that decided to go to nuclear war over Gorsuch. I think this lady in Missouri, Senator McCaskill, my gut feeling when I saw her reaction was that she's probably thinking about retiring, because I don't see how she can run in Missouri after that vote. I don't know much about Tester up in Montana. I was very surprised with him too, but I think Tester and McCaskill would have been a heck of a lot better off politically if they had gone ahead and voted for Gorsuch, but it didn't happen that way. But I agree with you. I think it was a huge mistake by the Democrats. Let me raise one last topic here as we're running out of time, and that is Obamacare. When we talked the last time, I told you that I felt that the Republicans should have passed the first Obamacare that came out of the House. Even it was not perfect. I know it had problems, but it was symbolically a good move to pass it. It would have been a victory for the president, a promise kept, and so on. That didn't happen, as we know. And now we're into the discussion is, when do we actually tackle Obamacare? And some people are saying, do it right away, do it again right away, or wait until September when the real implosion begins to happen with the new premiums. Parts of the country that do not even have an insurance company covering the area anymore, and that, of course, is going to grow. So, Barry, what is your sense? What would you recommend to the Republicans to do with Obamacare in this calendar year, Barry?
Well, as I wrote very consistently, actually I started writing in 2009, a year before the plan was even voted on, when it was first proposed. I have been a absolutely consistent opponent of this particular legislation and this principle of health care insurance since the very beginning. And so and I pointed out in my writing in 2010, 2014, and 2016 that it had become a huge issue in those elections, and it wasn't the only one, but it was a powerful one, and the Democrats could have avoided many, many problems if they had chosen to do other kinds of legislation early on instead of Obamacare. So as far as I'm concerned, it's got to go. In fact, it's going to go, whether they take any action or not, because it is, as you suggested, it is imploding as we watch it. Not only are the rates going up, but insurance companies are refusing to be part of it. The millions of people were never insured, in spite of the promise that they would be. It has had a tremendously negative impact on medical education, on the number of people going into medicine, of the nature of medical practice. It is having a tremendous negative effect. There were a few good things in Obamacare. Nothing is 100% anything. And there are ways to adapt and bring along some of those ideas into the new legislation after they've repealed Obamacare. There's no question that there are some good ideas. There's no question that there needed to be a healthcare reform, healthcare insurance reform. No one disagreed that there wasn't a need for reform. In fact, those I disagree strongly with those on the far right who said there shouldn't be any healthcare insurance reform. We simply cannot be indifferent to people in our communities who are unable to afford healthcare insurance in the past. Because healthcare is something that is community-wide. If you can have all the medical health insurance you can have all the money in the world and go to the best doctors, but if the community is not healthy, if groups within the community are ignored and allowed to be susceptible to disease, then it will affect everybody, because disease and medical hardship is shared by the community. We have emergency room health care is far more expensive than healthcare reform. Right. So no one's saying we don't do it. We simply do a different principle. Instead of doing it from Washington and bureaucratically, we put it back in the states. We allow the patients to be the doctors to be the primary players, so that they get to go into the healthcare insurance market, and they're able to go to the doctors they choose and get the health care they choose. It does mean there are limits. You can't have everything. That's just life. But that doesn't mean we then turn that back on its head and say we're indifferent. We're not going to provide care or provide the means by which poor people and indigent people and lower middle class people and people who can't afford the finest in medical care possible, at least have enough care and preventative medical care to lead healthy lives. So there is a way to do this. We want to do it. So the timing now becomes a political question, and I'm not sure what the real answer is. I suspect there are efforts made to revive it right away. But I think that having had a success in foreign policy and a success with the Supreme Court nomination, the administration needs a few more successes, maybe even on infrastructure, which is much more popular, is less polarized an issue, because infrastructure reform improvement involves putting people to work. Now it is it's not a deficit breaker, so there are some opposition to it, but it's still a good idea because we have to fix our infrastructure. We need roads. We need all kinds of things. Country can't come to a standstill. So I think the president has the right ideas on these matters, and it's up to I think Paul Ryan, who I'm a, and your listeners know have been very positive about Paul Ryan, but I think he's got to prove himself again. He's got to show that he has the skill to get this thing through. I mean, I think that even though it's a much more difficult job in the Senate on paper, because the Senate is much more partisan, the House has a 40-vote margin, but then they got all those so-called Freedom Caucus members who are, I think, standing in the way, obstructionists, and are not doing their job as members of Congress. But that's a whole different discussion. That's
a whole new topic. But I think you're exactly right. And without getting into a whole show about healthcare, I agree with your point that you have to have healthcare for people who cannot afford it, for people who are self-employed or whatever. And I always favored more of the tax credit approach rather than having a government solution for everybody. I mean, the idea that a 60-year-old man or woman should have to buy a policy with maternity, for example, is pretty stupid, really. I mean, they should be able to go out in the marketplace and buy whatever policy suits them, whether it's a catastrophic policy or whatever it may be. There ought to be more choice in the hands of the consumer. Well, Barry, good news to close the program. Your Yankees did win today, 7-3, so they had a good Sunday afternoon. And as always, I want to thank you for your time and thank you for all the great work that you do at the Prairie Editor. It's a great source of information. I always enjoy when I get my email from you with a new post. Keep up the great work, and let's do this again very soon.
Well, I want to wish your listeners, for those who are celebrating tomorrow, a happy Passover, and for those who are celebrating next Sunday, a happy Easter, and a really, hopefully, as we head through this holiday season, a new sense of optimism and hope for the future, and let's just hope for the best.
Absolutely. Happy Passover, like you indicated, to all of our friends. And, of course, next week is what we used to call Holy Week when we were growing up. I don't think they call it Holy Week anymore. In Spanish they do, Semana Santa. But anyway, I always thought of it as Holy Week leading to Good Friday and, of course, Easter Sunday. But happy Passover to you and to all of our friends, Barry, and have a great week. And we'll see. We'll do this again very soon.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Barry. Barry Casselman, the Prairie Editor. We have a link to his website and the show information. As I continue to say every time we have Barry on the program, this is really something, you need to take a look at his website. It's the Prairie Editor, and check it out and become a member of the Prairie Editor. I think you're going to get tremendous information, tremendous analysis, and you're going to enjoy it a great deal, as I do when I get my email from Barry with a new article, new analysis. And in fact, very often I get something from him and I say, hey, Barry, we got to do a show about this because this is really good information. Have a wonderful Sunday, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in very pretty and sunny Dallas.